I was shaking so bad that morning that I nearly spilled my coffee all over a $2.3 million contract. 30 years. 30 years I spent building Hayes Construction from nothing. I came back from Vietnam with nothing but calloused hands and a stubborn heart, and I turned that into a $20 million a year company. I have laid foundations in the Texas heat, poured concrete in freezing rain, and shaken hands with men who tried to cheat me and failed. I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal the business world could throw at a man. I was so wrong. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Victor Caldwell. I am 58 years old, and what I am about to tell you is the story of how the person I trusted most in this world tried to take everything from me. My company, my health, my life, and how a chance encounter at a construction site food truck changed everything before it was too late. It started as an ordinary Tuesday. My business partner of 15 years, Theodore Walsh, was sitting across from me inside our construction trailer at the Oakwood Plaza development site. Blueprints everywhere. The smell of sawdust and diesel in the air. Normal. Familiar. Safe. Or so I thought. Theodore kept tapping his fingers on that contract, watching me stare at the signature line like it was written in a foreign language. "Victor," he finally said, leaning forward, "you've been staring at that line for 10 minutes. What is going on with you? Are you feeling all right?" And the honest answer was no. No, I had not been feeling all right for months. I had been getting these dizzy spells that hit me out of nowhere like someone had grabbed the whole world and given it a hard shake. Headaches that felt like a vice grip tightening behind my eyes. A bone-deep fatigue that made a 58-year-old man feel like he was 108. My doctor kept telling me it was stressful. Age catching up with me. 30 years of hard labor. Finally, he sent me the bill. I told Theodore I was just tired. I haven't been sleeping well. He gave me that look men give each other when they don't quite believe what they're hearing, but decide not to push it. He stood up and said, "Maria's taco truck is here. You want something?" "Just coffee," I said. "Black." He headed outside. Through the thin walls of the trailer, I could hear the familiar sounds of a job site at lunchtime. The low rumble of the food truck engine. My crew laughed and joked around. Steel-toed boots on gravel. The kind of sounds that had been the soundtrack of my life for 3 decades. And then I heard a voice that stopped my heart cold. A woman's voice. Soft, frightened, and heartbreakingly familiar. I turned to the window, and there she was. My daughter-in-law, Rachel Caldwell, my son Brandon's wife, 8 months pregnant, wearing a stained apron, carefully balancing a cash box against her enormous belly while she took orders from my own construction crew through the little window of Maria's taco truck. For a moment, I could not breathe. I genuinely could not pull a single breath into my lungs. Rachel had been missing for 3 months. Brandon had told the entire family that she had run off with another man. Some guy from California, he said, cleaned out their joint bank account and disappeared without so much as a goodbye note. We had all grieved for Brandon. We had all consoled him. I had even let him move back into the family home, told him he could stay as long as he needed to get back on his feet. And there was his wife, the woman he swore had abandoned him, working a food truck for cash tips to survive. 8 months pregnant, pale as paper, moving around that cramped little truck space like every step took everything she had. Theodore walked up to the truck window, and I watched his face change when he recognized her. "Holy," he said, and even through the glass I could hear him. "Isn't that Brandon's wife?" Rachel's whole body went rigid. She handed him his order without looking up, her hands trembling so badly the bag almost fell. The way she hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear, I had seen that posture before. In Vietnam, on soldiers who had survived something that had not quite finished breaking them. Something cracked open inside my chest. I stood up from that desk and walked out into the Texas afternoon heat. The sun hit me like a wall, and for a second the world tilted sideways the way it had been doing for months. But I kept walking toward that truck. When Rachel looked up and saw me coming, the color drained completely from her face. Pure terror, like a person who had been running from something and had just realized they were cornered. "Rachel," I said, and my voice cracked on her name. "What are you doing here?" She looked around frantically. I'm just working, Mr. Caldwell. Just trying to make some money. That's all. Working. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Brandon said you left town. Said you ran off with someone. And then she started to cry. Not quietly. The kind of crying a person does when they have been holding everything together so tightly for so long that one kind word just splits them wide open. Please, she whispered, wiping her face with the back of her wrist. Please don't tell him you saw me. Don't tell him. Rachel, he's my son. Please. Can we talk somewhere else? Please, Victor. If you're still with me right now, share this with someone who needs to hear it. I told Theodore I was feeling unwell and needed to head home early, which is not a lie. I felt like the ground was sliding out from under me with every step. We agreed to finish the Oakwood Plaza paperwork the next day. Rachel followed me in a beat-up old Honda to a Denny's about 5 miles from the site, far enough that none of my crew would see us, close enough that I hoped she would not panic and bolt before I understood what was happening. When she slid into the booth across from me, I really looked at her for the first time. Dark circles carved deep under her eyes. The skin was so pale it was almost gray. One hand resting on her belly the whole time, gentle and protective, like she was apologizing to her unborn child for the world he was about to enter. The waitress brought us coffee, and I watched Rachel reach for the sugar with hands that would not stop shaking. He didn't just ask me to leave. Victor, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He made me leave. I set my cup down very carefully. What do you mean he made you? Brandon brought a woman named Patricia home. You might remember her. She used to work for your company. You let her go a couple of years ago. I remembered Patricia Wilson. Sharp mind. Good with numbers. I had fired her for falsifying expense reports, padding her mileage and hotel costs. The kind of dishonesty that seems small until you realize what it tells you about a person's character. He moved her into our house, Rachel continued. Said she was helping him with business analysis, reviewing contracts and financials. But they weren't hiding what was actually going on between them. They wanted me to see it. That was the point. My hands curled into fists under the table. She started wearing my clothes, Victor, my jewelry. She would cook dinner in my kitchen, wearing my apron. They would sit at the dinner table together, talking about their future, where they wanted to travel, what they wanted to build together. And I would be right there. And it was like I did not exist. Like I was a piece of furniture they had not gotten around to throwing out yet. I could feel something shifting inside me. Something quiet and terrible, like the ground before an earthquake. Rachel, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me what was happening? She looked down at her hands. Because Brandon told me that if I caused any trouble, he would have me declared mentally unfit. He said he would take the baby. He said he had lawyers, good ones, and that I had nothing. No money, no family support, nothing. Her voice broke on that last word. My own parents think I abandoned him. He called them before I could get to a phone. Told them I was having some kind of breakdown, that I had run off with another man. They won't take my calls anymore. I sat back in that booth and just breathed for a moment. My son, the boy I had brought home from the hospital wrapped in a blue blanket. The boy I had taught to frame a wall and read a blueprint and look a man in the eye when you shake his hand. That boy had thrown his 8 months pregnant wife out onto the street, taken everything she had, turned her own family against her, and then told everyone she was the villain of the story. And I had believed him. There's something else, Rachel said, her voice dropping even lower. Something about you being sick. Something cold moved through me. What do you mean? Before Brandon made me leave, I used to do bookkeeping for small businesses. I know how financial records are supposed to look, and I know what it looks like when they don't add up. She met my eyes for the first time since we sat down. Victor, someone has been stealing from Hayes Construction. A significant amount of money. Shell companies, fake vendor payments, inflated material costs. It's not simple skimming. It's sophisticated, organized. How much money? I said quietly. At least $750,000. Maybe more. The numbers landed like hammer blows. And then something else hit me. Every time my dizzy spells were at their worst, every time I was too foggy and sick to manage the company myself, Brandon would step in. Smooth, capable, always right there. Just helping his old man out, he would say, taking care of things while I recovered. I looked at Rachel. Has anyone ever made your coffee for you? Or brought you a drink, and it tasted just slightly off? Just a little bitter when it shouldn't have been? She went absolutely still. The color left her face entirely. Oh God, she breathed. Oh my God. You think there. I don't know what I think yet. But my voice wasn't as steady as I needed it to be. I need to ask you one more thing. The morning you left, did you hear anything before you went? Rachel's hand went over her mouth. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a sound at all. I heard them talking in the kitchen early in the morning. Patricia said something about powder, about how it was working faster than they had expected. I thought she was talking about some kind of vitamin supplement. I didn't. She stopped, pressed her lips together, tears sliding silently down her face. I didn't understand what I was hearing. The restaurant seemed to close in around me. The noise of other diners faded to nothing. 30 years of building something with my hands. 30 years of believing that what mattered most was the character you built alongside the business. My own son was trying to kill me. Stay with me, because what I discovered next will leave you breathless. I paid the check and drove Rachel to a decent hotel across town. Paid for 2 weeks in cash. Told the desk clerk she was my niece visiting from out of state. The room was clean and safe. Deadbolt on the door. View of the parking lot, so she could see if anyone pulled in that she recognized. Stay here, I told her. Don't go anywhere unless it is an absolute emergency. I'll bring you food, anything you need. But Rachel, I made sure she was looking at me when I said the next part. If something happens to me in the next few days, if I don't check in with you, you call this number. I wrote down Albert Foster's contact information on a piece of hotel notepad paper. Al and I had served in Vietnam, different units, but the same bitter education in what human beings are capable of doing to each other. We had stayed in touch all these years, helped each other out when the need arose. You don't forget the men who came home from the same darkness you survived. Rachel took the paper with shaking hands and folded it carefully, like it was a lifeline, which I suppose it was. I called Al from the parking lot before I even started my engine. Al, I said when he picked up, I need a favor. A big one. Talk to me, Vic. I told him everything. I told him about Rachel, about the missing money, about the way my symptoms had been tracking perfectly with the moments when Brandon was most eager to step in and run the company for me. Al listened without interrupting, the way good investigators do. He let the whole story land before he said a word. You want me to investigate your own son? He said finally. I want you to find the truth. If I'm wrong, I'll spend the rest of my life making it right with Brandon. But if I'm not, if you're not wrong, you're lucky to be alive. Al's voice was quiet and serious. Arsenic poisoning, Vic, that's what you're describing. Slow build-up over months. Classic signs. It's a coward's method because it looks like natural causes. Fatigue, nausea, neurological symptoms. Any doctor who isn't looking for it will chalk it up to age and stress. A pause. I know a man who runs a private laboratory. Discreet, fast, reliable. You give me a blood sample, and I'll have answers within 48 hours. I made an appointment with my doctor, Beverly Johnson, for the first thing the next morning. Told her I was thinking about selling the company and wanted a full physical before I started entertaining retirement. She scheduled me for a complete blood panel without any suspicion. I did not tell her what I was actually looking for. Not yet. That evening, Brandon came by the house, as usual. He brought me my evening tea, Earl Grey with honey, same as he had been bringing me every night for months. Sat down across from me with that expression he had been wearing for most of the last year, the one that looked like concern but felt, now that I was paying attention, more like calculation. You look tired tonight, Dad. Rough day. Long day, I said, looking at his face. Theodore and I couldn't get the Oakwood Plaza paperwork finished. I'm going to have to push it to tomorrow. You really should think about stepping back more. Let me handle the day-to-day. You've earned the rest. Maybe you're right, I said. This Oakwood Plaza deal might be my last big project. Something moved behind his eyes. Just a flicker. Just a small brightening that he covered quickly with a careful, neutral expression. Really? You're seriously thinking about retiring? Thinking about it. The question is whether you be ready to take over full-time. I've been ready for years, Dad. Everything you've built, everything you've taught me, I'm ready. I picked up the teacup he had made me. Hold it. And while Brandon turned toward the window to say something about company operations, I switched our cups. Smoothly, quietly. The tea I was supposed to drink was now sitting in front of my son. Brandon, I said, what would you do if something happened to me? If I passed tomorrow, what will become of Hayes Construction? He leaned forward and I watched his hands. Relaxed. Comfortable. He had no idea what he was sitting in front of. Everything transfers to me according to your will. The house, the business, all the assets. I'd carry on your legacy, Dad. Run the company the way you'd want it run. And what about Rachel? Her and the baby? The change in his face was immediate and total, like pulling back a curtain and seeing a completely different room behind it. Cold. Hard. Something I did not recognize. Rachel made her choice. She abandoned this family. I can't be responsible for someone who walked out on us. She's carrying your child. That baby probably isn't even mine. I felt those words like a physical blow to the chest. The girl who had been living in her car, 8 months pregnant, working a food truck for cash tips to eat, and my son was sitting in my living room calling her child a lie. Brandon, that's your wife you're talking about. Not anymore. He stood up, and something was shifting in him now, something restless and dark. And if you're thinking about changing your will in her favor, maybe you should consider your priorities more carefully. What does that mean? He started pacing, the way he used to pace as a boy when he was working himself up to something. It means you're 58 years old, Dad. You've been getting sick. Old men get sick. Old men have accidents. Sometimes he snapped his fingers. Fade. The room went very quiet. Are you threatening me, son? I'm being practical. You built this company for me, for your family, not for some woman who couldn't even appreciate what she had. I stood up from my chair, and I stood up steadily, steadier than I'd felt in months, because the tea I had been drinking for the past weeks was currently sitting untouched in front of my son, and one night without poison was already making a noticeable difference in how my body felt. Behind the door of the next room, Detective Richard Palmer of Dallas PD was recording every single word. Somebody needs to hear this story today. Share it for them. The next morning, I felt the difference in my body before I even opened my eyes. No room spinning when I sat up. No wave of nausea when I stood. The brain fog that had been sitting on me for months had lifted just enough that I could think clearly for the first time in what felt like forever. At 9 in the morning, Albert called. Vic, your boy just walked into Dallas Medical Supply on Elm Street. Commercial account operation. They supply restricted chemicals to labs and industrial clients. I'm in the parking lot watching the entrance. I gripped the phone. Stay on him. 20 minutes later, he just came out with a small package. He's heading toward the Lakewood area. Looks like he's going to an apartment complex. Lakewood Gardens? How'd you know? That's where Patricia Wilson lives. Brandon was inside that apartment for just over an hour. When he came out, Patricia was with him. They drove together back toward my construction site, toward my trailer, toward the desk where those $2.3 million Oakwood Plaza papers were still sitting and signed. I drove out there and parked where I had a clear view through the trailer windows. They were inside together, leaning over paperwork, talking with their heads close together. Two people making plans they thought were almost complete. My phone rang. Victor, it was Dr. Beverly Johnson. I need you to come in as soon as possible. Your blood work came back, and I need to talk to you in person. Tell me now, Beverly. A pause. Your results show elevated levels of heavy metals. Arsenic specifically. This is an occupational exposure, Victor, and it isn't accidental. Someone has been deliberately introducing arsenic into your system over an extended period of time. The truck window in front of me. My son's shadow moving behind the glass. Victor. Her voice was very careful. I have to ask you directly. Is there any possibility that someone is trying to hurt you? Yes, I said. There is. You need to go to the police immediately. And you need to start chelation therapy to begin clearing this out of your body before the damage becomes permanent. I hung up and called Albert. Al, give me Detective Palmer's direct line. Tell him Victor Caldwell needs to file a report for attempted murder. A silence. Then, you got confirmation. Blood test. Positive for arsenic. Just like you said. Jesus, Vic. His voice was rough. How are you even standing upright? 30 years of construction work and 2 tours worth of stubbornness. I was trying to sound stronger than I felt. The truth was I was sitting in that car with my hands gripping the steering wheel because I needed something to hold on to. My own son, my only child, the boy I had taught to lay a foundation and build something true. He had been poisoning me slowly for months, buying himself time to drain my company and wait for me to stop breathing. But I was still breathing, and I was not done yet. You will not believe what happened when we set the trap. Stay with me. Detective Richard Palmer was about my age, with a face that had absorbed too many years of watching families tear each other apart. When Albert and I sat down across from him at Dallas Police Headquarters, he listened to everything I laid out without writing a single note. He was the kind of cop who remembers what matters because he understands that what matters is people, not paperwork. Mr. Caldwell, he said when I finished, these are serious charges. Attempted murder and large-scale embezzlement. The blood test is significant evidence, but we need the poisoning method documented. We need financial records establishing the theft, and ideally he paused. We need your son to say something that puts him directly in the frame. On record. What if I told you he already has? I said. Last night in my living room. Palmer leaned forward. I told him about switching the cups, about the recording equipment he himself had installed earlier that day, about every word Brandon had spoken while standing in the home his father had built, casually describing how old men just fade. The detective was quiet for a long moment. That recording, combined with the blood work and financial records, is enough to move on. But I want to give him one more chance to seal it himself. People like this, when they think they've already won, they get sloppy, overconfident. He looked at me steadily. Are you willing to do one more night? I did not hesitate for even a second. Tell me what you need. The plan was simple. I would call Brandon that evening, tell him I was having chest pains and needed him to come to the house right away. The kind of call a son gets about his aging, sick father that should produce worry and love. We would see what it produced in Brandon. I made the call at 7 that evening. Son, I said, letting my voice go rough and breathless, which was not entirely an act. I need you to come over to the house right now. Something is wrong. I'm having chest pains, and I can't catch my breath properly. Did you call 911? Should I meet you at the hospital? No hospitals. I just need you here. Please hurry. He was at the front door in 15 minutes. The recording equipment was already running. Palmer was in the room at the back of the house. 2 uniformed officers were positioned outside. Brandon came through the door with his face arranged in an expression of worry. He was good at it. He had been practicing it for over a year. But I had been watching people's faces my entire adult life, on job sites, in boardrooms, in the jungle, and I knew the difference between real fear and performance concern. His eyes went to me in the chair, took in how I looked, and I saw him calculating. Dad, you look terrible. We really should get you to the emergency room. No hospitals, I said weakly. Just sit with me for a minute. There's something I need to tell you. About the company. About the will. He sat down, leaned forward, and despite everything, he could not quite stop the anticipation from showing in his posture. I've been thinking about what you said, I told him slowly, like a man choosing his last words carefully. About stepping back, letting you take the reins. I want to make some changes to my will tomorrow. I want to leave a portion of the business to Rachel and the baby. The performance dropped away like a mask hitting the floor. What the hell are you talking about? His voice was completely different now. Flat. Cold. The voice of a stranger. Dad, Rachel left us. She doesn't deserve anything from this family. She's carrying your child. My grandchild deserves security. That baby probably isn't even mine. He stood up and started pacing the room in the same way he had the night before, and I realized with a breaking heart that this was who my son actually was. This had been in him all along, and I had not seen it. Or maybe I had not wanted to see it. You know what? He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. If you're stupid enough to change your will in favor of her, you might not live long enough to sign the papers. Silence filled the room. What does that mean, Brandon? It means you're an old man, Dad. Old men have accidents. Heart attacks. Sometimes they just fade away in their sleep. It happens. Are you threatening your own father? He looked at me with something I can only describe as contempt. Not anger. No remorse. Just cold, clean contempt, like I was an obstacle that had taken slightly longer to move than expected. I'm stating facts. You've been getting weaker for months. Maybe it's time to accept reality. You built this company for me. Everything you have belongs to me. And some pregnant woman you feel sorry for is not going to take what's mine. I stood up from the chair, and I stood up steadily, and I looked at my son the way I had looked at men in Vietnam who had chosen to become something less than human. And I said very quietly, "Benjamin, it's over." Detective Palmer came through the back door. The two officers came through the front. Brandon's face went the color of old concrete. "This is insane," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "He's a sick old man. He's confused." Brandon Caldwell, Palmer said, and read him his rights while the officers moved in. Brandon kept talking over the Miranda warning, kept insisting, kept trying to explain, the way people do when they have built their entire plan on the assumption that they are smarter than everyone around them and suddenly discover they are not. As they walked him toward the patrol car, he turned and looked back at me through the living room window, and there was nothing in his eyes that I recognized. No son, no boy I had held when he was small, no trace of the person I had spent 30 years trying to give a good life to. Just a stranger who had been caught. If this story is hitting you somewhere deep, you're not alone. Keep listening. Patricia Wilson was arrested at her apartment 2 hours later. The search warrant turned up arsenic in quantities that made the officers go quiet when they found it, along with detailed financial records that laid out the entire scheme in plain language. Transfer amounts, shell company names, account numbers, and a folder of documents related to bank accounts in Costa Rica that had been opened 8 months ago. They had been planning this for a long time. Albert and I sat in my living room that night after everyone had gone. He poured 2 glasses of the good whiskey I kept in the cabinet for occasions that deserved it. We did not talk much. Men who have been through certain things together do not need to fill silence with words. After a while he said, "We doing all right, Vic?" I thought about the question honestly. My hands were resting on my knees, and they were still shaking. Not from fear now, but from the arsenic that had been accumulating in my system for the better part of a year. My body was going to take time to come back from what had been done to it. "I will be," I said, and I meant it. What came out at trial will make your blood run cold. That's next. The trial happened 3 months later in a courtroom that smelled like wood polish and old air conditioning, and I sat in the gallery every single day. The prosecution was thorough and methodical the way good prosecutions are. They reconstructed the entire scheme in sequence, beginning with when Brandon, had first started accessing the company's financial systems under the pretense of helping me manage the business while I was unwell. Patricia's background in accounting had made her the architect of financial crime. She had set up a network of shell companies that received payments for construction materials and services that were either heavily inflated or entirely fictional. The money had moved through 4 different accounts before landing in Costa Rica. $750,000 confirmed. Possibly more that had been moved before the pattern became traceable. And then there was the other piece, the poison. The forensic expert who testified spent almost 2 hours explaining to the jury exactly what slow arsenic poisoning does to a human body, how it mimics natural illness, how it attacks the nervous system, causes fatigue, nausea, neurological confusion, how a doctor who was not specifically looking for it would attribute the symptoms to stress, age, overwork, how a person could be systematically poisoned over months and never know it until it was too late. I sat in that courtroom and listened to a medical professional describe what had been happening to my body for the past year, and I thought about all the evenings Brandon had sat across from me, handing me tea, watching me drink it, asking me how I was feeling. All those careful, concerned questions. All those gentle suggestions that maybe it was time to step back. Let him handle things. Rest while he could. The prosecution played the recording from my living room. I watched the jury listen to my son's voice describing how old men just fade. I watched their faces change. Watched them understand what kind of person they were looking at. Brandon's defense attorney worked very hard. He argued that I had been a controlling father, a tyrant who had made Brandon's professional life impossible, who had never given him the respect or autonomy he deserved. He suggested that the recording was taken out of context, that Brandon had been under extreme emotional stress, that the financial irregularities were the result of a business misunderstanding. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Patricia Wilson pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling. Brandon turned in his chair and looked directly at me. And in that look was not remorse, not grief, not the ghost of anything like love or sorrow for what had been between us. Just fury. At sentencing, when the judge gave him the opportunity to speak, Brandon told the court that I had ruined his life by never trusting him enough to let him lead. That everything he had done had been driven by a father who made it impossible for a son to become his own man. He stood there in that courtroom, and he put the weight of what he had done on my shoulders, and I sat in my chair, and I did not flinch, and I did not look away from him. Brandon received 15 years for attempted murder and embezzlement. Patricia Wilson received 20 years as the primary architect of the financial scheme. Neither of them looked at the other when the sentences were handed down. I suppose that is what happens to love that was built on the willingness to harm others. It does not survive the consequences of itself. I drove home alone that night. I sat on the front porch of the house I had lived in for 20 years, in the chair I had sat in 1,000 times, and I just breathed. The Texas night was warm, and the crickets were loud, and somewhere a dog was barking at nothing. I thought about the boy I had brought home from the hospital 31 years ago, the small warm weight of him in my arms, the way he had looked up at me with eyes that had not yet learned to hide what was in them. I wept that night. I'm not ashamed to say it. I wept for a long time for the son I had lost long before the trial, for the years I'd spent not seeing what was in front of me, for the boy who somewhere along the way had made choices that had carved all the humanity out of him and replaced it with calculation. And then I wiped my face and I went inside and I called Rachel at the hotel. It's over, I told her. He's been convicted. You and that baby are safe. On the other end of the phone, she cried too. And we stayed on the line for a while without saying anything, which was exactly right because some things do not need words. Tell someone today that they matter. You never know what someone is carrying. 2 weeks after the trial ended, my grandson was born. 7 pounds 4 ounces. Healthy as a spring morning. Rachel named him Leo. I was in the waiting room when the nurse came out, and when she told me I could come in, I walked through that door, and there was Rachel, exhausted and glowing the way new mothers are. And there was this tiny person with his face scrunched up like he was deeply offended by the brightness of the world. She put him in my arms. And this is the part that is hard to explain, the part that still catches me off guard when I think about it, even now. This tiny boy who had been in the middle of everything, whose existence had been used as a weapon against his own mother, who had been declared probably not even mine by a man who was supposed to protect him. This boy had no idea about any of it. He just looked up at me with those brand new eyes, and he was entirely and completely present. What are you going to tell him? I asked Rachel softly, when he's old enough to ask about his father. She did not answer right away. She watched me holding her son, and finally she said, I'm going to tell him that some people make choices that take them away from their own hearts, and that his grandfather loved him before he was even born. And that love is what made the difference. Leo made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a complaint, and tightened his tiny hand around my finger. In 30 years of building things with my hands, and I had never felt anything built as solidly as that. What I did next with Hayes Construction, and a lesson that changed how I will raise this boy, that's the final part. I started chelation therapy the week after the trial. The process of clearing arsenic from a human body is slow and not particularly comfortable. You sit for hours while a drip works through your system, pulling the poison out cell by cell, and you have a lot of time to think. I thought about everything. I thought about Vietnam and what it teaches you about who people are under pressure. I thought about 30 years of early mornings and late nights and handshake deals and broken backs, and what it takes to build something real. I thought about what I had passed on to my son and what I had failed to pass on, and I sat with the weight of that honestly, because a man who built what I built does not get to pretend that the outcome had nothing to do with him. The physical recovery took longer than I wanted. My hands still have a tremor some mornings. My energy is not what it was. But I am here. I am standing. I am watching the sun come up over a small ranch property about an hour outside Dallas. And that is not nothing. I handed day-to-day operations of Hayes Construction over to Theodore Walsh. Theodore, who had sat across from me in that trailer on the most important day of my life and not known what was happening any more than I did. Theodore, who had built 15 years of honest work alongside me and deserved to be trusted with what we had created together. I changed my will completely. Hayes Construction is to be sold, and the proceeds held in an irrevocable trust for Leo Caldwell. A trust that cannot be touched, contested, or reached by anyone, including a father serving a 15-year sentence, until Leo is an adult and capable of deciding what to do with it himself. Rachel and Leo come to the ranch every weekend. She calls me Dad now. The first time she said it, we were standing in the kitchen, and she said it without thinking, just naturally, the way you say a word that has become true. And I had to turn around and find something to look at out the window for a moment, because I did not want her to see me come undone over 2 letters and 3 letters strung together. But I did come undone just a little, just enough to feel it completely. Leo is almost walking now. He pulls himself up on the coffee table and stands there with this enormous expression of personal triumph, and then sits down hard and looks at you like you were supposed to prevent that somehow. He has Rachel's stubbornness and, God help us all, what looks like my determination. He's going to be a handful, and I cannot wait. Tell me in the comments what this story brought up for you. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because here is what I know now that I did not know a year ago. I thought I'd build a company. I thought that was the thing. 30 years of concrete and steel and signed contracts and a $20 million operation with my name on the side of every truck. I thought that was the legacy. I thought that was what I was leaving behind. But a company is just a thing. Things can be stolen, dissolved, transferred, liquidated. Things can be taken from you by people who decide that what you made is worth more to them than you are. What cannot be taken is what you build in people. Every Saturday morning when Leo wakes up at my ranch and I make him oatmeal and we sit on the porch and watch the horses in the field, I am building something. When he is old enough, I will teach him to frame a wall. I will teach him to read a blueprint. I will teach him to look a person in the eye when you shake their hand and to mean what you say and to understand that genuine effort is not a transaction. It is a form of respect for the life you have been given. I will teach him that family loyalty means protecting each other, not just when it is easy, not just when there is no cost to it, but when it is hard and frightening and uncertain and the whole world seems to be arranged against you. I will teach him what Rachel showed me on a day when she could have kept driving in that beat-up Honda and never looked up from the taco truck window. She looked up. She was terrified, and she looked up anyway. And everything that happened afterward came from that one small act of trust. Some evenings I sit on this porch and think about Brandon. I do not stop thinking about him. I do not think I ever will. He is my son, and that does not end, no matter what he did or what was done, no matter how many years a judge hands down or how cold his eyes were in that courtroom. The grief of it is permanent. That is just true, and I have made my peace with true things. But grief and regret are different from guilt, and I have learned to tell them apart. I made mistakes as a father. I gave my son too much too easily. I let success arrive in his life before he had built the character to carry it. I was proud when I should have been watchful. I was generous when I should have been requiring. I do not carry that as shame anymore, but I carry it as a lesson that I intend to use every day of my grandson's life. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. Character determines legacy. You can build a fortune and lose everything if you do not build the person alongside the business. Trust is earned through what people do when no one is watching, and that is the only thing worth knowing about a person when it really counts. My name is Victor Caldwell. I am 58 years old, and I still get up before sunrise, and I still drink my coffee black, and my hands shake a little more than they used to. But I am here. Leo is here. Rachel is here. And some mornings, when the light comes through the kitchen window in that particular way it does in early spring, and Leo is in his high chair making a complete disaster of his oatmeal, and Rachel is laughing at something on her phone, I feel something I do not quite have a word for. It is not happiness exactly, though it contains happiness. It is not peace exactly, though it contains peace. It is the feeling of something that was almost destroyed being quietly, stubbornly, completely alive. And that is everything.